Welcome to the San Clemente podcast, the only local podcast in the best beach town in the world. We're here to bring you weekly episodes highlighting everything from sports, culture, entertainment, politics, and everything else this beach town has to offer. Welcome back to the San Clemente podcast, the fastest growing podcast in San Clemente, California. I'm your host, Jeff Moore, and I am thrilled to have you here. Joining me today is my incredible co-host and partner, Brian De La Puente. We have a very exciting episode coming to you, a legend in his own right, a longtime San Clemente local, someone that was born at San Clemente Hospital. For a lot of you that may not be familiar with that, there's not many of us left that were actually born at San Clemente Hospital. So someone that fully gets San Clemente, understands San Clemente, and has a very, very deep-rooted story. And so we're very excited to have the one and only Jason Wright on our podcast. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
So we were talking for a while off camera about why we've had Jason on and why we invited him on the show. And the main reason and the main thing we're going to talk about is 1502 South El Camino Real. Many of you know it's a new development in town and in San Clemente, and it's a beautiful property and really an anchor at a intersection of San Clemente and Southwest San Clemente that's being developed. What a lot of you don't know is the backstory to how it came to be. And Jason and his family have owned that property for 50 plus years, and we're going to kind of get into that. So with that being said, Jason, why don't you kick us off a little bit and just share a little bit about the project and a little bit about the story?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. It's one of those projects that's commonly referred to as top tune. You know, you guys, when you think about what's been there, everybody thinks about the dirty, abandoned top tune or the mechanic site and just kind of what it's been over the past recent years. This property is an incredible property that started a long time ago as something far better and just went through a little bit of a hiccup as it needed to kind of be revitalized, if you will. So it's an interesting property. My family actually bought the property back in 1948, 49. So we've owned it since it was dirt, but it didn't start there. I come from a family that I have a grandfather who was born in 1897. He was much older than my grandmother. 28 years, by the way. Married as World War II secretary. You know, whoops. Today it's no big deal, right? But back then it was kind of a big deal, you know. So, you know, he used to come down and travel down one, and he would go on these fishing expeditions and trips and stuff, and so he ended up in San Clemente one day and was like, man, I love it here. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But he's fishing off the end of the pier, and he goes back up to you know, LA area where my family was based. And he came back again for a second trip, and he was just like, I've got to move my family here. It's San Clemente. Mm-hmm. It's just beautiful. So he actually made a trip down here, and he bought his first property in San Clemente, I believe he bought it in 46, and it was 211 Avenida Princesa. Now, a lot of people listening to this podcast might remember what it, or might not remember what it was, but they certainly know what it is today, which it was recently redeveloped, and 2 spec homes were built on it. They both sold in the $5 million range. Yep. Boy, do we feel foolish. Yep. But yeah, so 2 beautiful homes were developed there, but the house that they tore down to build those 2 homes was the house that my grandfather built and my dad was raised in. And it was really incredible because when he came down, he said, well, look, if I want to move my family to San Clemente, I need to have a place that I can call home. So he bought these 2 lots in the late 40s and hired a contractor and built some relationships and had a home built, the single-story home they tore down. And when it was built, he moved down here. The second property that my grandfather bought was the old top tune, we'll call it, right? And so he bought that property in 1949. And it was an interesting property because my grandfather, after, you know, in the second half of his life, became a builder, developer, salesperson of real estate in San Clemente. And it was interesting that property that he bought, he put his actual real estate sales office on, which we have some photos of here. It's kind of incredible. We got some really old photos of things that were there, but that property was actually at one time almost 3 times as large as it is today. And, if you can think back to before the freeways and the on-ramps and everything were there, San Clemente was just basically a sloping dirt hill.
Right.
And
well, some of those pictures of Princessa House, I mean, you can see all the way through to Marina, the 5-way stop down there on the way to Los Winds, and those pictures are insane.
Yeah, it's just like nothing.
We'll try to figure out how to get them up and
for sure
get everyone to see it. But it's wild. The house looks like it did right before it got torn down, and you can see all the way through. It's like a big giant vacant lot. It's wild. Some of these pictures you have are so cool.
Yeah, it would be great to rewind the clocks a little bit and go back there. But, from what my father explains and people that have been around San Clemente a long time is you basically had a dirt road in Del Mar that went down to a pier.
Right.
And then you had like a sloping bluff that was just this dirt sloping bluff. And then you'd have like a house and then another house over there. Like a house a mile away.
It's wild.
Today, it's quite different, right? And so we've seen a lot of development happen. But so yeah, he bought that property and it was just a real estate sales office and developer's office. And my grandfather, for the course of his life that he was alive in San Clemente, built several homes up and down the Ola Vista corridor. And it was funny, this was his hobby and his trend in the second half of his life. But we have this book of all these properties that he built. And it would be funny because it would have like the acquisition price. He'd be like, $3,500 for this lot and $7,500 for this lot over the years, And he paid his framer, $6,000, and he paid this guy. And he would build these properties and they would range, between like $35,000 and, cost of build. And he would sell them for like, $48,000 and $50,000 or, some of them he would sell at $28,000 depending on when they were built, but he was making a killing, right? He made a couple $1,000s on every house. It was great. It was good money.
Yeah.
So he did quite a few of them in town. And so he had his office there forever. And he passed when my dad was 10. He was significantly older than my grandmother was. And but passed when my dad was 10. And my grandmother had this property at 1502 South El Camino Real, where this office was there. And I think the Department of Transportation came in. I can't pinpoint exactly what year the on-ramp and the freeway and all the construction went in, but they needed a portion of that property, and it happened to be the property where the office was at. So they came in, and through eminent domain, they gave us some compensation, and they took like almost 2/3 of the property. And so we got down to this point where we had this property. It was right off of there was an off-ramp and an on-ramp. And we're sandwiched right in between it. So to some people, that's a great thing. Mm-hmm. Well, to Richfield Oil Corporation, that was a really good thing because they sell gasoline and there's an on-ramp and an off-ramp. And hey, so they came along and they leased the property from us. I don't know, maybe it was the 60s through the 70s. And it actually became an ARCO station. So ARCO is leasing this property from us. They have tanks of gasoline in the ground, and ARCO, for whatever reason, leaves the lease. And so my dad at the time was a truck driver, owned a trucking company, and John Campbell, a local San Clemente resident, late father of Baja champion Johnny Campbell. They pulled the tanks out of the ground at the station property, and we're like, hey, look, it's not going to be a gas station anymore. We'll just pull the tanks out of the ground. And in came a mechanic shop that became Top Tune. And so, Mohabit and Top Tune, they were there. They were our tenants forever for a long time.
That was in the 70s.
That was throughout the late 70s, the 80s, into the 90s. So, and my grandmother lived in town, worked at the local bank at the top of Del Mar. She, around the same time in the 70s, we didn't have any property because my grandfather was buying and selling all the property. So we still had one particular lot in town that was on Palizada, in the 300 block of Palizada. And it was funny because my grandfather bought the lots for two lots for $750 a piece when he bought them.
That's wild.
I know. So we
$700.
750, but because he bought them a long time before he passed, he just never developed them. So he had these two lots. It was 315 and 317 Palisada. And so eventually down the road, my grandmother had a triplex built because it was in that zone and that's where it fit. And she could live in one of the units as a single widowed woman, and she could rent the other two out and make an income from it. And she would work at the bank, and everything was golden. So she built that triplex. She lived there, but Muhammad was her tenant, and she still owned the 1502, El Camino Real, and Top Tune was there and paid a nominal rent, and everything was great. As she got later in her life, Top Tune wanted to purchase the property from us, and we actually did. Our family did a seller note carry, and we negotiated a sale with them, which we ended up, unfortunately, the economy did some things, and Top Tune didn't do so well, and we ended up having to get the property back. So through that process, we got the property back into our name, and here it is. I want to say that was around 2014. My grandmother passed in 2009, and in 2014, we ended up with this property back, and now we've got a property that's contaminated because it's had a gas station in it. The tanks have been in the ground. And, my family, my father and my aunt are deciding at this time to move on from some of the properties and the holdings that we have in San Clemente. And we've got this dirty property. And it's like, what do we do with it? That was an interesting time because we got connected with North Star Environmental, who does dirty dirt cleanups on sites. And, there's a lot of these sites in town that are just content. Like you're almost in handcuffs. You can't do anything with them. And so here we are. It's 2014, and we've got to do this long process with all these different regulatory bodies to figure out how are we going to clean the soil so that we can actually sell this property or develop this property. And excuse me, after going back and forth with ARCO and seeing who's going to help chip in on the cost, we were able to get to some sort of agreement with them that they would chip in a certain percentage. And then we used the state water boards to get funding for the cleanup on the other percentage as much as we could, so we could limit our liability, because these are multi-million-dollar cleanups, guys. I mean, it's really expensive to clean soil. So we start this process, and it takes 4.5 years.
Oh my gosh.
Just 4.5 years of nonstop machines running, vapor extraction, pulling these contaminants out of the soil. And I think about this time we're getting into like 2018. Well, in 2016, I became a real estate salesperson. And started selling real estate. My first task I had was selling this Mission Impossible property. And so as we're cleaning the property and we have it listed, just name a couple drive-through tenants that you guys can think about.
Like Taco Bell.
Oh, they came
McDonald's.
Starbucks. So we had all these suitors that were coming
that
at
one
us.
for
Yeah.
me.
It's lob.
Yeah, it's a
soft
lot.
toss.
So we get all these national drive-through
We
tenants.
knew where it was going.
Yeah, we did for sure.
And at the time, I'm thinking to myself, this is incredible. Yes. And we've got an off-ramp right there. We got an on-ramp right there. It's going to be great. And it just doesn't go that way. And we start getting into all of the requirements of the city for these uses and what it's going to take to get the stacking right so that we're not encroaching on the intersections. And it was a challenge. And I think that we went through this process with 3 or 4 different ESCOs with drive-through tenants. And none of them could get their site approved. It was just too much of a concern of the city that this was going to go into the intersection and that we were going to stack up traffic. So we ended up with one person in particular who was going to put a Starbucks there. And of course we had the discussion with the city, and we're like, oh, it's a Starbucks. And we started counting how many Starbucks are in town.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Like, oh no, the city's going to hate us if we put a Starbucks there, but it might be the only way to develop this property. So we get down the road with this developer who's going to put the Starbucks in. And I think it was like the straw that broke the camel's back was at the last minute, the city had this landscape requirement that they were going to be asking of this guy to meet. And he was just like, he was exhausted with it. He threw up his hands. He was like, this site can't be developed. And,
which is deflating for you guys too, right? I mean, here you are finally getting to a position to where you might be able to move the property, right? And get it developed. And you go so far with a tenant.
Yeah.
And at the last minute,
it just falls apart.
It just falls apart.
And so it kind of falls apart in our lap. And we're just, I think at that point, and I just remember saying to myself, like, what are we going to do here and how are we going to get this sold? So I had a conversation with my dad and my aunt, and we decided that I was going to take the lead on trying to come up with a new concept that was not a drive-through. So a little bit about the site. The site's at the end of an on-ramp, and it's referred to as a gateway site because it's a gateway into San Clemente. You get off the off-ramp. It's the first thing you see as you enter our beautiful city. So the architectural standards that they want on that development are very Spanish colonial, traditional to the style of what we have here in San Clemente. So we thought, well, who better than this guy, Michael Luna? You know, he does some of the most beautiful Spanish architecture that you've ever seen. And he's really got a beat on what can get approved in San Clemente and what the processes are. So I remember sitting down with Michael and I said, hey, look, here's what we've been through and here's where we're at. We need to come up with something right here that really not only works for the city, but works for the style and that also will bring value to the community. And I think that was important to Michael and it was important to us as we have this great history here that we really wanted to have something that had a value to the community. And after seeing the drive-through thing just continue to fail, it was kind of like we felt this like integrity to the project. Sure. And so my dad was all in on it and with me, my aunt was a participant and we started developing this great concept. And it was just a concept at the time because what we really wanted to do was create a concept that allowed somebody else to pick up the dream and run with it. And, Michael did a phenomenal job of creating one of just a front-loaded building right on the corner that just really had a lot of style to it and finesse and actually functionality and finesse to it to where it's like, hey, look, we're on a smaller lot. We've got to make the highest and best use. It's got to benefit this. There's a lot of moving parts right there. So Michael came in and created this beautiful, beautiful concept. And I think it was within weeks after we had that concept kind of laid out, my phone rings. And it's this gentleman named George Stambuk. And George, he represents this client. And we started talking for, I want to say it was like maybe 30 or 45 minutes, just about what we were starting to do there. And he said, hey, look, I think this is really interesting. I want to talk with my guy. And then, if he's okay, we'd like to meet with you. And so they had a conversation. I got a call back and we all met. We spent about like 2.5 hours in that meeting where we just talked about San Clemente. It was really interesting. We didn't really talk too much about the project, but we talked a lot about San Clemente. Right. And I remember when we got into the project, we pitched the project, the next thing was, hey, I want to come check this place out. I want to come see it. Let's go walk it. And I remember when Sanjay Patel came down to San Clemente the first time and we walked the property and we just drove around San Clemente and you could just see that he was like, I'm in love with this place. And you could feel his like just gravitational pull towards everything San Clemente is. And it was incredible to see somebody else that really bought into kind of what's here and the lifestyle and the community. And he loved the project enough that we ended up putting it together. We finished our processes with the water boards. We got our no further action letter. We did some due diligence on getting everything put together. And Sanjay bought the property to continue the dream. That's awesome. I think that was really like everything coming together.
Like being that close to having another Starbucks, the 9th or 10th or whatever. And being such a long lineage and your roots being so deep in San Clemente, I'm sure you were like, hell yeah. Like this would have been good for our family, whatever. But for the community, and then to have somebody like Sanjay buy in on it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it stars lined.
Absolutely.
How mad would you guys have been?
Well, what I find really, really cool is that you were able to stay on the project, and here you are, right?
Yeah.
Continuing with the dream as well, and still being able to share the story and participate in the deal and add so much value to that team, because a lot of these deals, you sell them, right? Especially as the broker, right?
Yep.
And you're done, right?
Yeah.
You're moving on to the next deal, but you took a different approach, which is awesome.
Yeah, that was kind of by design from everybody in the team. I think that, so my background, apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, obviously. So I've been a contractor since the early 2000s. I've been landscape, concrete. So I know the construction process, right? And before I sold real estate, that's what I did. And then having the knowledge of just the processes and the construction background and the resale and just kind of everything that goes into this, I stayed on as a consultant as to, hey, you're coming into my backyard. Let me make some connections with you and let me help with this process. And so I was able to work as kind of like on a consultative basis on the entitlement process. And this most of the stuff that I provided the team was before it broke ground, which was probably the most challenging part of this project. If you thought that getting entitled to the drive-through is hard, having a great rendering and a great concept was one thing, but putting it all down to what actually works became the next set of challenges.
So what year is this? So Sanjay Patel, the investor for the property, comes in. Is this 2020?
I want to say it was about 2020, 2021.
Okay.
Right? 2021.
So he comes in, purchases the property, closes escrow,
right.
takes over the renderings, starts working with the architect, starts working with you. And then what happens from there?
So from there, all of a sudden now we have to go into preparing all the documentation and what we need to go to the city to start getting entitlements on it. We got to go planning. We were not in coastal commission review, but we were in design subcommittee review board. We had to go to a public hearing, and we had some other hurdles. So Michael starts working. I start working with Michael, Luna, and Sanjay and George, and we start going through our process of, okay, this is the architect, here's the engineer we're going to hire, here's all the consultants, and we start reviewing all these contracts, and Michael starts putting all the pieces together with this project. And we start developing all the site plans and then getting through the schematic phase and getting into all the phases that we need to clear before we can go to the planning department. And so we finally get to the planning department and we submit this to design review subcommittee, and we have a pretty good meeting with them, and it worked out well. And there was some conditions that they were talking about in that meeting that we knew that we were going to have before we went to planning commission. And we got through most of the project, and we went to the planning commission. And I remember it was during COVID, so it was 2021. It was during COVID because the planning commission meeting that we had was actually on Zoom. And it was the last planning commission that the five of these planners were together. The five committee members were in the same room, and we actually got a unanimous decision, which or approval, which to us felt really good because we were like, hey, you know what? We're bringing something with a lot of value. They loved the project. So we were pretty happy at the time. We were like, yes,
very rare to get a unanimous decision
very
from
rare.
planning commission from any of those bodies of government.
Right.
Very, very, very hard for all of them to get behind it and support it and love what you've presented.
So we get that, and we think to ourselves, great, we're good to go.
Smooth sailing.
Smooth sailing. Time to get some CDs or construction drawings together and really get ready to rock and roll on this thing. Well, there was a condition that we had to get a final approval from Caltrans on the site plan that was approved. And the interesting thing is, because Caltrans and the Department of Transportation run everything along that corridor, especially when you're next to an off-ramp and an on-ramp. Last thing Caltrans, which we're both. Last thing Caltrans wants is something going on your building and your development that's going to impose on an intersection that could hypothetically back traffic up the off-ramp, go onto their freeway there right away.
Create an accident. Yep.
And so, or they don't. Yeah. So we have all this going on. Well, the first review of our site plan from Caltrans was basically a hard no. They were like, yep, not going to work, not approved. And you're like, well, what do you mean?
Yeah.
So they didn't give us too much reason other than the fact that it encroached on the right of way. And so when they said that to us, we said, well, wait a minute, what do you mean the right of way? And so we started really as a team diving into that, and we made requests.
I'm sorry to interject. So here's a new buyer, a new, investor coming in, purchasing this property. You guys go to Caltrans and it's a hard no.
Yeah.
Project's not going to work.
Project's not going to work. And by this
Imagine
time,
being the investor that comes in and buys this with the intention of building this new beautiful project, right?
now he's got something
shoot.
landlocked that he can't do anything with.
Right.
And so here I am. I'm thinking, well, I just sold this to this guy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He's gonna hate me.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
So it kind of, I've always been a solution based guy and not into quitting. So I took this bold move to start just running up the ladder. And so I didn't get the answer I wanted from this guy at Caltrans. So I went to this other department at Caltrans and didn't get the answer I wanted there. And that guy couldn't help me. And I just kept going up and up and up and up. So finally I got a hold of a number for the Sacramento Caltrans office. So I went straight to the head of Department of Transportation in the state capitol. And I called and I left a message on this guy's number. And I got an email back. And it said, hey, I got your voicemail. I wish I had saved the email. I got your voicemail. I'm in this. You want to talk to this guy in this department. So I called that guy in that department, left a voicemail, got a call back. And it just happened to be the guy that was in the right department at Caltrans at the Sacramento level that then put me in touch and stayed on the email. And he wrote an email to District 12 and said, here's what we need to do, and included everybody and CC'd everybody on the email that we needed to be involved in this decision process.
Right.
Once I had that email with everybody's email addresses, I was like, I got the director of District 12 in every single department that made decisions on approvals for site plans in the right of way.
Right.
That took several months, by the way. That did not happen as quick as I just said it.
No.
That was like, leave a voicemail, waited several weeks, got an email, called and left that guy, waited, got an email. Like the waiting time frames between when you take action to when you get a response is huge.
Wow. How was Sanjay and his patience? Because a lot of developers that are putting this much capital into a project are not patient people. Man. How was Sanjay?
Sanjay is one of the has some of just the best resolve of anybody I've ever met in my entire life. He is a very calm, methodical thinker, doesn't overreact, stays very in the moment, and he doesn't panic. It's kind of incredible.
And how big of a game changer, right?
Oh, it just
to have someone like that.
It took so much pressure off of, hey, look, every single step of the way, we just kind of knew, like, this is what we have to do. This is where our focus is at, and this is what we're going to do. And when we get through this, then we'll go to the next step.
Yep.
It
was
was
kind
like
of a trip. Like you're not acting out of fear. You're like, I want to, what's the right word? I want to like perform for this.
right
for this guy because he's nice, right?
Oh,
you work harder for people that are
he's
appreciative,
understanding and all that stuff. You're like, I need to perform for this guy. Like, it's almost more empowering working for that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, and keep in mind, this is a guy that's buying into, he's buying into our community. He's buying into our way of life and our lifestyle. Mm-hmm. He's buying into us.
Yeah.
And he's like, I like what I see and I want to be a part of it. So like, that's not a guy that you just want to just let down.
Right.
So we continue on with this Caltrans thing. And finally, we had title officers involved. We had people sifting through old title books and maps, looking for what they were talking about as an encroachment of their right of way. And I got on the Zoom call with Michael and George and Sanjay and everybody. I said, hey, look, this is the only map that we have that shows the right of way. And the legend had at the bottom of the map had like the dotted thing that marked where the right of way was. And we noticed that it came up, it came down El Camino Real towards the bridge, and it jumped across the street over towards where Tommy Burgers was at, and then ran on the other side of El Camino Real. Mm-hmm. So when we got back on the Zoom call with Caltrans, we pointed that out and we said, hey, unless you can show me a map that shows that we are encroaching on this right of way, we don't see where your argument stands. And lo and behold, through enough argument, it stood up and they approved the plan. Back of the curb cut on El Camino Real in Valencia and the on-ramp back of the curb cut. And we have to have a driveway that's a specific width. And we can only move it one direction or the other. Like, you know, I don't even know how many feet. We had less than a foot. Maybe it was like a foot. I gotta have to recall with Michael Luna. But Michael had to make this driveway work. And he had to shift it so where it wasn't in the middle of our building. Right. We can't redesign the building at this point. And Michael finds a way to get it to where it's not within 50 feet of the on-ramp and it's not within 50 feet of the off-ramp. The off-ramp was the easy part, I think. It was the on-ramp that was the difficult part because we had to start pushing this thing towards the building. And so we get that final approval and we finally got a grading permit, guys. This was like, and I think from the start to the finish of that, I want to say this started. I mean, look, if I had to go back to when we took the property, we're talking like 2014 to 2000, between vapor extraction and the cleaning of the dirt.
That's
Sanjay
4.5 years.
That's 4.5. Then we got another 2021 to, when did we break ground on that? 2022 almost. So like, that's a long time. Let's just call it 7 years of the approval process of preparation, just in preparation.
Before you even break ground.
Before you break ground.
Just to get the grading permit.
The level of appreciation that we actually have for what we did in those 7 years to be able to now start construction was pretty incredible.
Well, talk about the value in that process now where you're at. You're new to real estate. Yeah. And this complex project is one of your first projects, right? Yeah. Like you are those lessons are priceless.
Yeah, it really paid dividends to everything that I have in my arsenal as not just like a contractor and a developer and a consultant, but a salesperson, but just total. I mean, it was it's kind of an accumulation of my body of like the work I've put in my life, and it's by accident, right? It's not like, hey, look, I was a kid. I started out. I loved doing construction work. I got a contractor's license. I did that for a while, and then I got into real estate, and I did that, and then I pulled in. So it's like you put everything that you've done in your life together, and it's like this project really kind of ignited all of that. So, after that process with the property, then it came time to interviewing contractors and connecting with local contractors. And putting kind of the bid process together. And that was interesting. I did not know our current contractor when we started this. We had interviewed some other local contractors, and we kind of ran into, I think it was with you. We met Mark Williams of MWC Constructors, and Mark was everything we were looking for, really. I mean, when we interviewed with Mark, we had sat down with several different other contractors, and he just had this amazing process where he was like, hey, here's what we do. We're going to take the plans. We're going to put them into this system that scans them all in and gets all the lineal footages. And then it goes out to this national database, and it'll tell you exactly what your approximate build cost is going to be. And then we get started. And it was like, well, what do you mean? Tell me more.
Right. Yes. Yeah, no, you're right. It's wild because when I was building Rare Society, that's when we had met, right? Yeah. And as we're even talking through this, it's like bringing back old memories. And you guys had walked through our property. Right. And I remember Sanjay and the team asking, like, what are you guys going to lease it for? Who are you leasing it to, et cetera? Like, they had so many questions around it. But it just goes to show the importance of like what one project can do and how it can lead to the next one. So that's amazing.
Yeah. And he's just got a great system. Like Mark's so transparent. And it's just like he'll cost value engineer everything.
Sure.
You know, he's got this incredible system called Procore, which gives you so much detail on the everyday, day-to-day operations of the build. Everything was transparent. I mean, everything from interviewing subcontractors to showing us like, hey, here's the subcontractor's bids. Here's why we think this is the best one. Here's how we can cost value engineer this.
Yeah.
It was just like, wow, you know.
You really have to have the stars align on those types of projects, because had you got a contractor or a construction company or even an architect that didn't know what they were doing, or that, you know, had turned Sanjay, like everything, you know, goes by the wayside there.
Yeah.
So.
And you know, it's pretty incredible to just have the team had come together the way it did.
For sure.
It wasn't like we sought each other out. It was just by accident that we all came together. Which is interesting because during this process, we actually did a couple other projects with Sanjay.
Yeah.
You know, we had we did the 100 and 130 Avenida Rosa, which is next to the fire station.
Yeah.
And I think like there were some vacant lots there, and I think everybody had tried to buy those lots because they were perfect for these like condo complexes, and nobody could figure out how to. There's an easement that goes through that
Explain what an easement is, just on a high level.
So an easement is, you know, there's a right of passage through the property to another adjacent property that wouldn't otherwise be accessible from their property. So they basically had this easement to get through our property to get to their back parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody could really communicate, is all it came down to, with them on what worked. So people would buy it and they'd be like, oh, we're going to do this. And they're like, well, that doesn't work for us. So I think we entered into escrow, and I met with the representative for that property. And I said, hey, can you just like line it out for me? What do you guys need? And it was that simple.
Sure.
Like, just give me a list of what you need, and let me see if we can go back with our team and make that work.
Yep. Because they would have to sign off on whatever you guys ended up doing. Yep.
And so again, hey, Michael.
Yeah.
You know? So we called Michael Luna. We start sitting down and we start brainstorming on what we can get here. And you know, we came up with a concept where we can actually get them what they need. We're going to beautify your property. We're going to do the back parking lot. We'll put in a rollaway gate for you. We're going to have to move that power pole, but that's just something we'll deal with so that we can get this project going, which was three condominiums there, and they're currently being framed. But it was interesting because we loved that project, and we were getting ready to start that project when I had another client who just happens to be building like needed a family compound. Older, their elderly mom, and then the two sons wanted to have like a place where mom was close, but they all had their own units. It was just like this perfect project. All the stars aligned, and they actually came in and they purchased the entire build, the construction contracts, everything from Sanjay, which was interesting because then we moved into another project, 501 Elena Lane, that we're working on right now. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts in that, but that's the way that team came together. So it's like we met by accident, and then here we are. We have all these other projects in town that we're able to capitalize on and do together.
An amazing project, adding so much value to the community and to the city of San Clemente.
And really, most of the projects with Sanjay are vacant lots, right? They're not like, we're finding the vacant lots and we're putting products on them that really serve the community. So it's kind of neat. And Sanjay is committed to that. He's kind of become a San Clemente resident, even though he's not living here yet.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
But Sanjay is incredible, and this property is now built, and it took several years to build it. So, but I mean, when I go to what this property is now, and granted, it's not my family name that owns it, but it is a client of mine that owns it, and it's just incredible that this is legitimately 75 years in the making.
Right.
We are 2024, and this started in 1948 or 49. That's like, this is a story of a property that's 25 years in the making. And I think that it's important to tell this story because throughout the process, you can watch the social channels and the message boards, and you see people like, oh, that dirty dump, and oh my gosh, that eyesore. And yes, was it all of those things? It was. But the reason for it is because the amount of work that went in to just getting approvals to put a shovel in the ground, it was almost necessary.
Right.
But somebody had to take that and do it. Somebody had, and it's like, I kind of feel to this day that if we hadn't done, the work in getting that soil cleaned up and coming up with these concepts, I think it would still be sitting as an abandoned gas station to do.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. That intersection is better for it.
Yeah.
And I think your grandpa would be proud.
Yeah,
Like it's cool that you're still attached to it. You'll forever be attached to it, which is rad. What's happening with it now? Like, where are we at? Like, what's going on with the property?
So right now we are. So George Stambuk is the commercial broker that works with Sanjay, and he is heading up the leases, the commercial leases.
Cool.
I do a lot of residential stuff. George does the commercial. So George has got a couple. I believe they're finalizing a lease right now with a restaurant tenant for the downstairs, and we have the finalized lease or the somewhat finalized lease for the upstairs unit, which is office space. Guys, it's beautiful up there. It's like ocean view office space. But yeah, both spaces I believe are pretty close to being leased out. I don't know that they're 100% committed yet, but there's still some work that's going on with TI, tenant improvements, and so there'll be another round of work that has to happen on the interior of the restaurant space before we actually say, hey, we can walk up the street and grab a bite to eat. But I'm going to tell you, I think whatever restaurant goes in there, it's going to bring so much value. I mean, the Southwest San Clemente people are going to be able to literally walk up the street or drive their golf cart up the street and just have a nice restaurant on that south end side of town.
For sure.
And that's going to just be, it's going to be an incredible spot for years to come.
Yeah, I know my parents are down there. They're excited. They're always, what's going in there?
Yep.
Everyone's, Jeff and I have walked it, and you just see people like looking over the fence. Like everyone's curious, and I just think everyone is invested in the community, and I think it's going to be a great ad.
It's going to be a great ad, but it is wild because most people do, right? They just get off the exit and they see an unbelievably beautiful building. They don't realize
a lot better than Top Tune.
Exactly. But even the Top Tune, to your point, right?
Yeah.
People would
It's
just
nostalgic.
speculate. But they would speculate it's dirty, it's this, that. They don't know or didn't know the backstory of your grandfather and his dream and him coming here and what had to go through to get to where it's at. It's just it's an amazing story. It really is.
Yeah, it's funny too because there's a lot of people in town that maybe they're a little afraid of development or maybe they are anti-development, but it's kind of like I go back to just my family's history. It's like if my family came here. I didn't come here. I came here in 1981, guys. Yeah. My family came here so long ago. It's like there was like 1,300 people in town or something.
I mean,
like
some of
nobody
these
in
pictures.
town. And the funny thing is like we're a part. I feel like I'm a part of the development of the revitalization of Southwest San Clemente. And I don't think it's something to be afraid of. I think it's just that like when you have something that's great and you have a lifestyle that others, want, and it's only a matter of time before it attracts a lot of people. And I'm not saying that we need to become this overcrowded city, but it's like if we're like kind of like just out in the community instilling what we believe to be community values, and we're like living the lifestyle and we're showing by example, we're going to attract people that want that lifestyle and that will have those community values. And like Sanjay is such a perfect example of that. Here's a guy that he's not, a third generation San Clemente guy, but he's coming here and he's developing and he's doing things, but he's attracted to to San Clemente because of the values that we have of this being this quaint, like kind of cool. I mean, it's fishing town in the 50s turning into a surf mecca. And like, it's still a beach town and he's attracted that and he's bringing that value and we've kind of instilled that lifestyle in him, which is kind of neat. So it's awesome. Like we lead by example where we live.
Yeah, I love that.
And that's why we've, and we've talked about it 1,000 times, like why we've wanted to, do this podcast too, right? We want to influence as much as we can these developments. And to your point, I mean, Sanjay and any developer, right, that you attract to San Clemente, you want them to be in it for the community, not just for the bottom line. Right. And Sanjay is a perfect example of that. Like that is a hard property to get to pencil out, and you have to be willing to take risks.
And it might not pencil out for him for several years, but that's how committed he is to this town. He's like, hey, look, eventually I will get my money back and it will become a positive investment.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's commitment. That's really, really neat. So don't be afraid of development.
I was going to say exactly. Keep talking about it because
Yeah.
it is amazing, right? I mean, it is developing, but in a good way for sure.
Yeah.
What do you see most? Residential development, commercial development, mixed use? What do you see?
So there's a lot of projects in the city queue right now. There are some mixed use plan projects. I think that whole entire corner now on El Camino Real, it's kind of funny. Like we broke ground and then it was like, bam, Tommy Burgers is now going to be redeveloped. And then the guy that owns the property adjacent to us, that is a mixed use zone. Believe it or not, we got kind of, the zoning, whoever wrote the zoning in San Clemente, they cut our building out of the mixed use zone by like 10 feet.
Yeah.
But that's going to be a mixed use project that's really similar to the 1010 Santiago, which is across from Ralph's. There is some commercial development in town. And look, anytime commercial comes, usually the residential stuff follows. But in Southwest San Clemente, we're starting to see a lot of development going on.
What do you think values are going to do? Home values? Are we going to see them going up and away?
I'll give you a hint. I don't see home values coming down. Okay. Don't see home values coming down. I think that we are creating, we have a beach community. There is no more property available on the coast of Orange County. It just doesn't exist. All the developer lots that we saw sold in Crystal Cove, they're all sold out. They're gone as of 2019, I think. The Strand, Crystal Cove, whatever developer land product you could buy is no longer exist. So now if you want to be on the coast, you have to pay a premium for the properties that you want to redevelop. And that is kind of where we see the value.
Right.
It's value in land, value in property has gone up along the coastline. So as we move forward, the only way to really do anything is to buy something that's older that needs to be revitalized or torn down, unfortunately, and redeveloped. And that's where stuff like my grandfather's house that he built on 211 Princessa.
There's not that many of those left.
And
there's
that's
really not.
No, you can drive around down there and there's a handful, but
as far as the double lots go, so like I have a project going on on San Antonio on the Loop in the 200 block, 229 and 231 San Antonio, where we're building 2 brand new spec homes there, and it was on a double lot that was lot divided. So, and that's what you're going to start to see, and that's going to attract people from outside of Orange County to Orange County, and that's going to push values, and values will go up because ultimately what we're seeing in the marketplace right now is that new product sells fast and new product sells at a premium.
Yep.
And I think that these people that are doing these developments understand that, but there's nothing wrong with it. And it brings value to the community because the more the home values around you go up, guess what, guys? The more your value goes up. So.
Yeah, and the other thing we're starting to see too are the development of some hotels. I know there's a couple of those in the queue of San Clemente as well.
Yeah, I believe Mark is working on one. So.
Yep, exactly.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
Well, next big development, you got to come back on, come visit with us and tell us all about it. I love the history of town. Seeing some of these pictures is really cool. And that's what we're trying to do down here is just kind of capture some of these stories and document it. And, we appreciate you coming hang out with us. It's great to meet you and hear your story and keep doing the good work.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Where can people follow you at?
You can follow me the best way to follow me is on Instagram, Jason Wright, OCRE. And you'll get most of my stuff there. And then I got a link tree where you can get all my contact information there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any last things that you want to shout out? Any other projects that you're working on that you want to talk about quickly before we tap out of here?
Yeah, I not just yet. I'll give you guys some insight that I throughout this process and throughout everything that I've done, I've kind of put together a very tight-knit group with a real estate fund where we actually are going to become developers, and we are going to use our experience to really push some projects that are value projects in San Clemente and in Orange County. So if anybody is ever looking for a way to get into development or a way to invest some money in real estate, but hasn't really thought about what that process looks like and how to do it, we will, over the course of the next year or so, be putting together projects that we're going to create small groups of people and investors to go do these developments with people. So
awesome. That sounds amazing. Well, we will link Jason's information down in the description below. Make sure to like, subscribe, share this content, and Thanks again for tuning into another amazing podcast. Thank you for listening in. Join us for another episode next week, coming to you from our studio on Del Mar in downtown San Clemente. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at the San Clemente Podcast and subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify so you never miss an episode.